Part 3, Chapter 5, Section 1 of Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 3, Chapter 5, Section 1. Raskolnikov was already entering the room. He came in looking as though he had the utmost difficulty not to burst out laughing again. Behind him Razumihin strode in, gawky and awkward, shamefaced and red as a peony, with an utterly crestfallen and ferocious expression. His face and whole figure really were ridiculous at that moment, and amply justified Raskolnikov's laughter. Raskolnikov, not waiting for an introduction, bowed to Porfiry Petrovitch, who stood in the middle of the room looking inquiringly at them. He held out his hand and shook hands, still apparently making desperate efforts to subdue his mirth and utter a few words to introduce himself. But he had no sooner succeeded in assuming a serious air and muttering something when he suddenly glanced again as though accidentally at Razumihin and could no longer control himself. His stifled laughter broke out the more irresistibly the more he tried to restrain it. The extraordinary ferocity with which Razumihin received the spontaneous mirth gave the whole scene the appearance of most genuine fun and naturalness. Razumihin strengthened this impression as though on purpose. "Fool! You fiend!" he roared, waving his arm which at once struck a little round table with an empty tea-glass on it. Everything was sent flying and crashing. "But why break chairs, gentlemen? You know it's a loss to the crown," Porfiry Petrovitch quoted gaily. Raskolnikov was still laughing, with his hand in Porfiry Petrovitch's, but anxious not to overdo it, awaited the right moment to put a natural end to it. Razumihin, completely put to confusion by upsetting the table and smashing the glass, gazed gloomily at the fragments, cursed and turned sharply to the window, where he stood looking out with his back to the company, with a fiercely scowling countenance, seeing nothing. Porfiry Petrovitch laughed and was ready to go on laughing, but obviously looked for explanations. Zametov had been sitting in the corner, but he rose at the visitor's entrance and was standing in expectation with a smile on his lips, though he looked with surprise and even, it seemed, incredulity at the whole scene, and at Raskolnikov with a certain embarrassment. Zametov's unexpected presence struck Raskolnikov unpleasantly. "I've got to think of that," he thought. "Excuse me, please," he began, affecting extreme embarrassment. "Raskolnikov." "Not at all. Very pleasant to see you. And how pleasantly you've come in. Why, won't he even say good morning?" Porfiry Petrovitch nodded at Razumihin. "Upon my honour, I don't know why he is in such a rage with me. I only told him as we came along that he was like Romeo, and proved it. And that was all, I think." "Pig!" ejaculated Razumihin without turning round. "There must have been very grave grounds for it, if he is so furious at the word," Porfiry laughed. "Oh, you sharp lawyer! Damn you all!" snapped Razumihin, and suddenly bursting out laughing himself, he went up to Porfiry with a more cheerful face, as though nothing had happened. "That'll do. We are all fools. To come to business, this is my friend Rodion Romanovitch Raskolnikov. In the first place he has heard of you and wants to make your acquaintance, and secondly he has a little matter of business with you." "Bah! Zametov! What brought you here? Have you met before? Have you known each other long?" "What does this mean?" thought Raskolnikov uneasily. Zametov seemed taken aback, but not very much so. "Why, it was at your rooms we met yesterday," he said easily. "Then I have been spared the trouble. All last week he was begging me to introduce him to you. Porfiry and you have sniffed each other out without me. Where is your tobacco?" Porfiry Petrovitch was wearing a dressing gown, very clean linen, and trodden down slippers. He was a man of about 35, short, stout even to corpulence, and clean shaven. He wore his hair cut short, and had a large round head, particularly prominent at the back. His soft round, rather snub-nosed face was of a sickly yellowish colour, but had a vigorous and rather ironical expression. It would have been good-natured except for a look in the eyes, which shone with a watery mawkish light under almost white blinking eyelashes. The expression of those eyes was strangely out of keeping with his somewhat womanish figure, and gave it something far more serious than could be guessed at first sight. As soon as Porfiry Petrovitch heard that his visitor had a little matter of business with him, he begged him to sit down on the sofa, and sat down himself on the other end, waiting for him to explain his business, with that careful and over-serious attention which is at once oppressive and embarrassing, especially to a stranger, and especially if what you are discussing is in your opinion of far too little importance for such exceptional solemnity. But in brief and coherent phrases Raskolnikov explained his business clearly and exactly, and was so well satisfied with himself that he even succeeded in taking a good look at Porfiry. Porfiry Petrovitch did not once take his eyes off him. Razumihin, sitting opposite at the same table, listened warmly and impatiently, looking from one to the other every moment with rather excessive interest. "Fool!" Raskolnikov swore to himself. "You have to give information to the police," Porfiry replied with a most businesslike air, "that having learnt of this incident, that is, of the murder, you beg to inform the lawyer in charge of the case that such and such things belong to you and that you desire to redeem them, or... but they will write to you." "That's just the point, that at the present moment," Raskolnikov tried his utmost to feign embarrassment, "I am not quite in funds, and even this trifling sum is beyond me. I only wanted, you see, for the present to declare that the things are mine, and that when I have money..." "That's no matter," answered Porfiry Petrovitch, receiving his explanation of his pecuniary position coldly. "But you can, if you prefer, write straight to me, to say that having been informed of the matter, and claiming such and such as your property, you beg..." "On an ordinary sheet of paper?" Raskolnikov interrupted eagerly, again interested in the financial side of the question. "Oh, the most ordinary." And suddenly Porfiry Petrovitch looked with obvious irony at him, screwing up his eyes and, as it were, winking at him. But perhaps it was Raskolnikov's fancy, for it all lasted but a moment. There was certainly something of the sort; Raskolnikov could have sworn he winked at him, goodness knows why. "He knows," flashed through his mind like lightning. "Forgive my troubling you about such trifles," he went on, a little disconcerted. "The things are only worth 5 roubles, but I prize them particularly for the sake of those from whom they came to me, and I must confess that I was alarmed when I heard..." "That's why you were so much struck when I mentioned to Zossimov that Porfiry was inquiring for everyone who had pledges," Razumihin put in with obvious intention. This was really unbearable. Raskolnikov could not help glancing at him with a flash of vindictive anger in his black eyes, but immediately recollected himself. "You seem to be jeering at me, brother," he said to him with a well-feigned irritability. "I dare say I do seem to you absurdly anxious about such trash. But you mustn't think me selfish or grasping for that, and these two things may be anything but trash in my eyes. I told you just now that the silver watch, though it's not worth a cent, is the only thing left us of my father's. You may laugh at me, but my mother is here," he turned suddenly to Porfiry, "and if she knew," he turned again hurriedly to Razumihin, carefully making his voice tremble, "that the watch was lost, she would be in despair. You know what women are." "Not a bit of it. I didn't mean that at all, quite the contrary," shouted Razumihin, distressed. "Was it right? Was it natural? Did I overdo it?" Raskolnikov asked himself in a tremor. "Why did I say that about women?" "Oh, your mother is with you?" Porfiry Petrovitch inquired. "Yes." "When did she come?" "Last night." Porfiry paused as though reflecting. "Your things would not in any case be lost," he went on calmly and coldly. "I have been expecting you here for some time." And as though that was a matter of no importance, he carefully offered the ash tray to Razumihin, who was ruthlessly scattering cigarette ash over the carpet. Raskolnikov shuddered, but Porfiry did not seem to be looking at him and was still concerned with Razumihin's cigarette. "What? Expecting him? Why, did you know that he had pledges there?" cried Razumihin. Porfiry Petrovitch addressed himself to Raskolnikov. "Your things, the ring and the watch, were wrapped up together, and on the paper your name was legibly written in pencil, together with the date on which you left them with her." "How observant you are!" Raskolnikov smiled awkwardly, doing his very utmost to look him straight in the face, but he failed, and suddenly added: "I say that because I suppose there were a great many pledges, that it must be difficult to remember them all. But you remember them all so clearly, and... stupid, feeble," he thought. "Why did I add that?" "But we know all who had pledges, and you are the only one who hasn't come forward," Porfiry answered with hardly perceptible irony. "I haven't been quite well." "I heard that too. I heard indeed that you were in great distress about something. You look pale still." "I am not pale at all. No, I am quite well," Raskolnikov snapped out rudely and angrily, completely changing his tone. His anger was mounting, he could not repress it. "And in my anger I shall betray myself," flashed through his mind again. "Why are they torturing me?" "Not quite well," Razumihin caught him up. "What next? He was unconscious and delirious all yesterday. Would you believe, Porfiry, as soon as our backs were turned, he dressed, though he could hardly stand, and gave us the slip and went off on a spree somewhere till midnight, delirious all the time. Would you believe it? Extraordinary!" "Really delirious? You don't say so!" Porfiry shook his head in a womanish way. "Nonsense! Don't you believe it? But you don't believe it anyway," Raskolnikov let slip in his anger. But Porfiry Petrovitch did not seem to catch those strange words. "But how could you have gone out if you hadn't been delirious?" Razumihin got hot suddenly. "What did you go out for? What was the object of it, and why on the sly? Were you in your senses when you did it? Now that all danger is over, I can speak plainly." "I was awfully sick of them yesterday," Raskolnikov addressed Porfiry suddenly with a smile of insolent defiance. "I ran away from them to take lodgings where they wouldn't find me, and took a lot of money with me. Mr. Zametov there saw it. I say, Mr. Zametov, was I sensible or delirious yesterday? Settle our dispute." He could have strangled Zametov at that moment, so hateful were his expression and his silence to him. "In my opinion, you talked sensibly and even artfully, but you were extremely irritable," Zametov pronounced dryly. "And Nikodim Fomitch was telling me to day," put in Porfiry Petrovitch, "that he met you very late last night, in the lodging of a man who had been run over." "And there," said Razumihin, "weren't you mad then? You gave your last penny to the widow for the funeral. If you wanted to help, give 15 or 20 even, but keep 3 roubles for yourself at least. But he flung away all the 25 at once." "Maybe I found a treasure somewhere and you know nothing of it. So that's why I was liberal yesterday. Mr. Zametov knows I've found a treasure. Excuse us, please, for disturbing you for half an hour with such trivialities," he said, turning to Porfiry Petrovitch with trembling lips. "We are boring you, aren't we?" "Oh no, quite the contrary, quite the contrary. If only you knew how you interest me. It's interesting to look on and listen, and I am really glad you have come forward at last." "But you might give us some tea. My throat's dry," cried Razumihin. "Capital idea! Perhaps we will all keep you company. Wouldn't you like something more essential before tea?" "Get along with you." Porfiry Petrovitch went out to order tea. Raskolnikov's thoughts were in a whirl. He was in terrible exasperation. "The worst of it is, they don't disguise it. They don't care to stand on ceremony. And how, if you didn't know me at all, did you come to talk to Nikodim Fomitch about me? So they don't care to hide that they are tracking me like a pack of dogs. They simply spit in my face." He was shaking with rage. "Come, strike me openly. Don't play with me like a cat with a mouse. It's hardly civil, Porfiry Petrovitch, but perhaps I won't allow it. I shall get up and throw the whole truth in your ugly faces, and you'll see how I despise you." He could hardly breathe. "And what if it's only my fancy? What if I am mistaken and through inexperience I get angry and don't keep up my nasty part? Perhaps it's all unintentional. All their phrases are the usual ones, but there is something about them. It all might be said, but there is something. Why did he say bluntly 'with her'? Why did Zametov add that I spoke artfully? Why do they speak in that tone? Yes, the tone. Razumihin is sitting here. Why does he see nothing? That innocent blockhead never does see anything. Feverish again. Did Porfiry wink at me just now? Of course it's nonsense. What could he wink for? Are they trying to upset my nerves, or are they teasing me? Either it's ill fancy or they know. Even Zametov is rude. Is Zametov rude? Zametov has changed his mind. I foresaw he would change his mind. He is at home here, while it's my first visit. Porfiry does not consider him a visitor, sits with his back to him. They're as thick as thieves, no doubt, over me. Not a doubt they were talking about me before we came. Do they know about the flat? If only they'd make haste! When I said that I ran away to take a flat, he let it pass. I put that in cleverly about a flat, it may be of use afterwards. Delirious indeed! Ha ha! He knows all about last night. He didn't know of my mother's arrival. The hag had written the date on in pencil. You are wrong, you won't catch me. There are no facts, it's all supposition. You produce facts, the flat even isn't a fact but delirium. I know what to say to them. Do they know about the flat? I won't go without finding out. What did I come for? But my being angry now maybe is a fact. Fool! How irritable I am! Perhaps that's right, to play the invalid. He is feeling me. He will try to catch me. Why did I come? All this flashed like lightning through his mind. Porfiry Petrovitch returned quickly. He became suddenly more jovial. "Your party yesterday, brother, has left my head rather... and I am out of sorts altogether," he began in quite a different tone, laughing to Razumihin. "Was it interesting? I left you yesterday at the most interesting point. Who got the best of it?" "Oh, no one, of course. They got on to everlasting questions, floated off into space." "Only fancy, Rodya, what we got on to yesterday. Whether there is such a thing as crime. I told you that we talked our heads off." "What is there strange? It's an everyday social question," Raskolnikov answered casually. "The question wasn't put quite like that," observed Porfiry. "Not quite, that's true," Razumihin agreed at once, getting warm and hurried as usual. "Listen, Rodion, and tell us your opinion. I want to hear it." "I was fighting tooth and nail with them and wanted you to help me. I told them you were coming. It began with the socialist doctrine. You know their doctrine. Crime is a protest against the abnormality of the social organisation and nothing more, and nothing more. No other cause is admitted." "You are wrong there!" cried Porfiry Petrovitch. He was noticeably animated and kept laughing as he looked at Razumihin, which made him more excited than ever. "Nothing is admitted," Razumihin interrupted with heat. "I am not wrong. I'll show you their pamphlets. Everything with them is the influence of environment and nothing else. Their favourite phrase. From which it follows that if society is normally organised, all crime will cease at once, since there will be nothing to protest against, and all men will become righteous in one instant. Human nature is not taken into account, it is excluded, it's not supposed to exist. They don't recognise that humanity, developing by a historical and living process, will become at last a normal society. But they believe that a social system that has come out of some mathematical brain is going to organise all humanity at once and make it just and sinless in an instant, quicker than any living process. That's why they instinctively dislike history. Nothing but ugliness and stupidity in it. And they explain it all as stupidity. That's why they so dislike the living process of life. They don't want a living soul. The living soul demands life. The soul won't obey the rules of mechanics. The soul is an object of suspicion. The soul is retrograde. But what they want, though, it smells of death, and can be made of india rubber, at least is not alive, has no will, is servile and won't revolt. And it comes in the end to their reducing everything to the building of walls and the planning of rooms and passages in a phalanstery. The phalanstery is ready indeed, but your human nature is not ready for the phalanstery, it wants life. It hasn't completed its vital process, it's too soon for the graveyard. You can't skip over nature by logic. Logic presupposes 3 possibilities, but there are millions. Cut away a million and reduce it all to the question of comfort? That's the easiest solution of the problem. It's seductively clear and you mustn't think about it. That's the great thing, you mustn't think. The whole secret of life in 2 pages of print. Now he is off, beating the drum. Catch hold of him, do," laughed Porfiry. "Can you imagine," he turned to Raskolnikov, "6 people holding forth like that last night in one room, with punch as a preliminary? No, brother, you are wrong. Environment accounts for a great deal in crime, I can assure you of that." "Oh, I know it does. But just tell me, a man of 40 violates a child of 10. Was it environment drove him to it?" "Well, strictly speaking, it did," Porfiry observed with noteworthy gravity. "A crime of that nature may be very well ascribed to the influence of environment." Razumihin was almost in a frenzy. "Oh, if you like," he roared, "I'll prove to you that your white eyelashes may very well be ascribed to the church of Ivan the Great's being 250 feet high. and I will prove it clearly, exactly, progressively, and even with a liberal tendency. I undertake to. Will you bet on it? Done. Let's hear, please, how he will prove it. End of Part 3, Chapter 5, Section 1. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 3, Chapter 5, Section 2 of Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 3, Chapter 5, Section 2. "He is always humbugging, confound him!" cried Razumihin, jumping up and gesticulating. "What's the use of talking to you? He does all that on purpose. You don't know him, Rodion. He took their side yesterday, simply to make fools of them. And the things he said yesterday! And they were delighted. He can keep it up for a fortnight together. Last night he persuaded us that he was going into a monastery. He stuck to it for 2 months. Not long ago he took it into his head to declare he was going to get married, that he had everything ready for the wedding. He ordered new clothes indeed. We all began to congratulate him. There was no bride, nothing. All pure fantasy." "Ah, you are wrong. I got the clothes before. It was the new clothes, in fact, that made me think of taking you in." "Are you such a good dissembler?" Raskolnikov asked carelessly. "You wouldn't have supposed it, eh? Wait a bit, I shall take you in too. Ha ha! No, I'll tell you the truth. All these questions about crime, environment, children, recalled to my mind an article of yours which interested me at the time. 'On Crime,' or something of the sort, I forget the title. I read it with pleasure 2 months ago in the Periodical Review." "My article? In the Periodical Review?" Raskolnikov asked in astonishment. "I certainly did write an article upon a book 6 months ago when I left the university, but I sent it to the Weekly Review." "But it came out in the periodical." "And the Weekly Review ceased to exist, so that's why it wasn't printed at the time." "Well, that's true. But when it ceased to exist, the Weekly Review was amalgamated with the periodical, and so your article appeared 2 months ago in the latter. Didn't you know?" Raskolnikov had not known. "Why, you might get some money out of them for the article. What a strange person you are! You lead such a solitary life that you know nothing of matters that concern you directly. It's a fact, I assure you." "Bravo, Rodya! I knew nothing about it either," cried Razumihin. "I'll run to day to the reading room and ask for the number. 2 months ago? What was the date? It doesn't matter though, I will find it. Think of not telling us!" "How did you find out that the article was mine? It's only signed with an initial." "I only learnt it by chance the other day, through the editor. I know him. I was very much interested. I analysed, if I remember, the psychology of a criminal before and after the crime." "Yes, and you maintain that the perpetration of a crime is always accompanied by illness. Very, very original. But it was not that part of your article that interested me so much, but an idea at the end of the article, which I regret to say you merely suggested without working it out clearly. There is, if you recollect, a suggestion that there are certain persons who can, that is, not precisely are able to, but have a perfect right to commit breaches of morality and crimes, and that the law is not for them." Raskolnikov smiled at the exaggerated and intentional distortion of his idea. "What? What do you mean, a right to crime? But not because of the influence of environment?" Razumihin inquired with some alarm even. "No, not exactly because of it," answered Porfiry. "In his article all men are divided into ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary men have to live in submission, have no right to transgress the law, because, don't you see, they are ordinary. But extraordinary men have a right to commit any crime, and to transgress the law in any way just because they are extraordinary. That was your idea, if I am not mistaken." "What do you mean? That can't be right," Razumihin muttered in bewilderment. Raskolnikov smiled again. He saw the point at once and knew where they wanted to drive him. He decided to take up the challenge. "That wasn't quite my contention," he began simply and modestly. "Yet I admit that you have stated it almost correctly, perhaps if you like perfectly so." It almost gave him pleasure to admit this. The only difference is that I don't contend that extraordinary people are always bound to commit breaches of morals, as you call it. In fact, I doubt whether such an argument could be published. I simply hinted that an extraordinary man has the right, that is, not an official right, but an inner right to decide in his own conscience to overstep certain obstacles, and only in case it is essential for the practical fulfilment of his idea, sometimes, perhaps, of benefit to the whole of humanity. You say that my article isn't definite. I am ready to make it as clear as I can. Perhaps I am right in thinking you want me to. Very well. I maintain that if the discoveries of Kepler and Newton could not have been made known except by sacrificing the lives of one, a dozen, 100, or more men, Newton would have had the right, would indeed have been in duty bound, to eliminate the dozen or the 100 men for the sake of making his discoveries known to the whole of humanity. But it does not follow from that Newton had a right to murder people right and left and to steal every day in the market. Then, I remember, I maintain in my article that all, legislators and leaders of men, such as Lycurgus, Solon, Mahomet, Napoleon, and so on, were all without exception criminals, from the very fact that making a new law they transgressed the ancient one, handed down from their ancestors and held sacred by the people. And they did not stop short at bloodshed either, if that bloodshed, often of innocent persons fighting bravely in defence of ancient law, were of use to their cause. It's remarkable, in fact, that the majority, indeed, of these benefactors and leaders of humanity were guilty of terrible carnage. In short, I maintain that all great men, or even men a little out of the common, that is to say, capable of giving some new word, must from their very nature be criminals, more or less, of course. Otherwise it's hard for them to get out of the common rut, and to remain in the common rut is what they can't submit to, from their very nature again, and to my mind they ought not indeed to submit to it. You see that there is nothing particularly new in all that. The same thing has been printed and read 1,000 times before. As for my division of people into ordinary and extraordinary, I acknowledge that it's somewhat arbitrary, but I don't insist upon exact numbers. I only believe in my leading idea that men are in general divided by a law of nature into two categories: inferior, ordinary, that is, so to say, material that serves only to reproduce its kind, and men who have the gift or the talent to utter a new word. There are, of course, innumerable subdivisions, but the distinguishing features of both categories are fairly well marked. The first category, generally speaking, are men conservative in temperament and law-abiding. They live under control and love to be controlled. To my thinking, it is their duty to be controlled, because that's their vocation, and there is nothing humiliating in it for them. The second category all transgress the law. They are destroyers or disposed to destruction according to their capacities. The crimes of these men are of course relative and varied. For the most part they seek in very varied ways the destruction of the present for the sake of the better. But if such a one is forced for the sake of his idea to step over a corpse or wade through blood, he can, I maintain, find within himself, in his conscience, a sanction for wading through blood, that depends on the idea and its dimensions, note that. It's only in that sense I speak of their right to crime in my article. You remember it began with the legal question. There's no need for such anxiety, however. The masses will scarcely ever admit this right. They punish them or hang them, more or less, and in doing so fulfil quite justly their conservative vocation. But the same masses set these criminals on a pedestal in the next generation and worship them, more or less. The first category is always the man of the present, the second the man of the future. The first preserve the world and people it, the second move the world and lead it to its goal. Each class has an equal right to exist. In fact, all have equal rights with me, and vive la guerre éternelle, till the New Jerusalem, of course. Then you believe in the New Jerusalem, do you? I do, Raskolnikov answered firmly. As he said these words and during the whole preceding tirade, he kept his eyes on one spot on the carpet. And do you believe in God? Excuse my curiosity. I do, repeated Raskolnikov, raising his eyes to Porfiry. And do you believe in Lazarus rising from the dead? I do. Why do you ask all this? You believe it literally?" "Literally." "You don't say so. I asked from curiosity, excuse me, but let us go back to the question. They are not always executed. Some, on the contrary..." "Triumph in their lifetime? Oh, yes. Some attain their ends in this life and then..." "They begin executing other people?" "If it's necessary. Indeed, for the most part they do. Your remark is very witty." "Thank you. But tell me this: how do you distinguish those extraordinary people from the ordinary ones? Are there signs at their birth? I feel there ought to be more exactitude, more external definition. Excuse the natural anxiety of a practical law-abiding citizen, but couldn't they adopt a special uniform, for instance? Couldn't they wear something, be branded in some way? For you know if confusion arises and a member of one category imagines that he belongs to the other, begins to eliminate obstacles as you so happily expressed it, then..." "Oh, that very often happens. That remark is wittier than the other." "Thank you." "No reason to. But take note that the mistake can only arise in the first category, that is among the ordinary people, as I perhaps unfortunately called them. In spite of their predisposition to obedience, very many of them, through a playfulness of nature, sometimes vouchsafed even to the cow, like to imagine themselves advanced people, destroyers, and to push themselves into the new movement, and this quite sincerely. Meanwhile the really new people are very often unobserved by them, or even despised as reactionaries of grovelling tendencies. But I don't think there is any considerable danger here, and you really need not be uneasy, for they never go very far. Of course they might have a thrashing sometimes for letting their fancy run away with them and to teach them their place, but no more. In fact, even this isn't necessary as they castigate themselves, for they are very conscientious. Some perform this service for one another, and others chastise themselves with their own hands. They will impose various public acts of penitence upon themselves, with a beautiful and edifying effect. In fact, you've nothing to be uneasy about, it's a law of nature." "Well, you have certainly set my mind more at rest on that score. But there's another thing worries me. Tell me, please, are there many people who have the right to kill others, these extraordinary people? I am ready to bow down to them, of course, but you must admit it's alarming if there are a great many of them, eh?" "Oh, you needn't worry about that either," Raskolnikov went on in the same tone. "People with new ideas, people with the faintest capacity for saying something new, are extremely few in number, extraordinarily so, in fact. One thing only is clear, that the appearance of all these grades and subdivisions of men must follow with unfailing regularity some law of nature. That law, of course, is unknown at present, but I am convinced that it exists, and one day may become known. The vast mass of mankind is mere material, and only exists in order by some great effort, by some mysterious process, by means of some crossing of races and stocks, to bring into the world at last perhaps one man out of 1,000 with a spark of independence. 1 in 10,000 perhaps, I speak roughly, approximately, is born with some independence, and with still greater independence 1 in 100,000. The man of genius is one of millions, and the great geniuses, the crown of humanity, appear on earth perhaps one in many thousand millions. In fact, I have not peeped into the retort in which all this takes place. But there certainly is and must be a definite law. It cannot be a matter of chance." "Why, are you both joking?" Razumihin cried at last. "There you sit, making fun of one another. Are you serious, Rodya?" Raskolnikov raised his pale and almost mournful face and made no reply. And the unconcealed, persistent, nervous and discourteous sarcasm of Porfiry seemed strange to Razumihin beside that quiet and mournful face. "Well, brother, if you are really serious... You are right, of course, in saying that it's not new, that it's like what we've read and heard 1,000 times already. But what is really original in all this, and is exclusively your own, to my horror, is that you sanction bloodshed in the name of conscience, and, excuse my saying so, with such fanaticism. That, I take it, is the point of your article. But that sanction of bloodshed by conscience is, to my mind, more terrible than the official legal sanction of bloodshed." "You are quite right. "It is more terrible," Porfiry agreed. "Yes, you must have exaggerated. There is some mistake. I shall read it. You can't think that. I shall read it." "All that is not in the article, there's only a hint of it," said Raskolnikov. "Yes, yes," Porfiry couldn't sit still. "Your attitude to crime is pretty clear to me now, but excuse me for my impertinence, I'm really ashamed to be worrying you like this. You see, you've removed my anxiety as to the two grades getting mixed, but there are various practical possibilities that make me uneasy. What if some man or youth imagines that he is a Lycurgus or Mahomet, a future one, of course, and suppose he begins to remove all obstacles. He has some great enterprise before him and needs money for it, and tries to get it, do you see?" Zametov gave a sudden guffaw in his corner. Raskolnikov did not even raise his eyes to him. "I must admit," he went on calmly, "that such cases certainly must arise. The vain and foolish are particularly apt to fall into that snare, young people especially." "Yes, you see. Well then?" "What then?" Raskolnikov smiled in reply. "That's not my fault. So it is and so it always will be. He said just now," he nodded at Razumihin, "that I sanction bloodshed. Society is too well protected by prisons, banishment, criminal investigators, penal servitude. There's no need to be uneasy, you have but to catch the thief." "And what if we do catch him?" "Then he gets what he deserves." "You are certainly logical, but what of his conscience?" "Why do you care about that?" "Simply from humanity. If he has a conscience, he will suffer for his mistake, that will be his punishment, as well as the prison." "But the real geniuses?" asked Razumihin, frowning. "Those who have the right to murder. Oughtn't they to suffer at all, even for the blood they've shed?" "Why the word 'ought'? It's not a matter of permission or prohibition. He will suffer if he is sorry for his victim. Pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart. The really great men must, I think, have great sadness on earth," he added dreamily, not in the tone of the conversation. He raised his eyes, looked earnestly at them all, smiled and took his cap. He was too quiet by comparison with his manner at his entrance, and he felt this. Everyone got up. "Well, you may abuse me, be angry with me if you like," Porfiry Petrovitch began again, "but I can't resist. Allow me one little question, I know I am troubling you. There is just one little notion I want to express, simply that I may not forget it." "Very good. Tell me your little notion." Raskolnikov stood waiting, pale and grave before him. "Well, you see, I really don't know how to express it properly. It's a playful, psychological idea. When you were writing your article, surely you couldn't have helped fancying yourself, just a little, an extraordinary man, uttering a new word in your sense. That's so, isn't it?" "Quite possibly," Raskolnikov answered contemptuously. Razumihin made a movement. "And, if so, could you bring yourself in case of worldly difficulties and hardship, or for some service to humanity, to overstep obstacles, for instance to rob and murder?" And again he winked with his left eye and laughed noiselessly just as before. "If I did, I certainly should not tell you," Raskolnikov answered with defiant and haughty contempt. "No, I was only interested on account of your article, from a literary point of view." "Foo! How obvious and insolent that is!" Raskolnikov thought with repulsion. "Allow me to observe," he answered dryly, "that I don't consider myself a Mahomet or a Napoleon, nor any personage of that kind, and not being one of them I cannot tell you how I should act." "Oh, come, don't we all think ourselves Napoleons now in Russia?" Porfiry Petrovitch said with alarming familiarity. Something peculiar betrayed itself in the very intonation of his voice. "Perhaps it was one of these future Napoleons who did for Alyona Ivanovna last week," Zametov blurted out from the corner. Raskolnikov did not speak, but looked firmly and intently at Porfiry. Razumihin was scowling gloomily. He seemed before this to be noticing something. He looked angrily around. There was a minute of gloomy silence. Raskolnikov turned to go. "Are you going already?" Porfiry said amiably, holding out his hand with excessive politeness. "Very, very glad of your acquaintance. As for your request, have no uneasiness. Write just as I told you. Or, better still, come to me there yourself in a day or two. To morrow, indeed. I shall be there at 11 o'clock for certain. We'll arrange it all. We'll have a talk. As one of the last to be there, you might perhaps be able to tell us something," he added with a most good-natured expression. "You want to cross‐examine me officially in due form?" Raskolnikov asked sharply. "Oh, why? That's not necessary for the present. You misunderstand me. I lose no opportunity, you see, and... I've talked with all who had pledges, I obtained evidence from some of them, and you are the last. Yes, by the way," he cried, seemingly suddenly delighted, "I just remember what was I thinking of?" He turned to Razumihin. "You were talking my ears off about that Nikolay. Of course, I know very well," he turned to Raskolnikov, "that the fellow is innocent, but what is one to do? We had to trouble Dmitri, too. This is the point, this is all. When you went up the stairs, it was past 7, wasn't it?" "Yes," answered Raskolnikov, with an unpleasant sensation at the very moment he spoke that he need not have said it. "Then when you went upstairs between 7 and 8, didn't you see in a flat that stood open on a second storey, do you remember, 2 workmen? Or at least one of them. They were painting there, didn't you notice them? It's very, very important for them." "Painters? No, I didn't see them," Raskolnikov answered slowly, as though ransacking his memory, while at the same instant he was racking every nerve, almost swooning with anxiety, to conjecture as quickly as possible where the trap lay, and not to overlook anything. "No, I didn't see them, and I don't think I noticed a flat like that open. But on the 4th storey" he had mastered the trap now and was triumphant "I remember now that someone was moving out of the flat opposite Alyona Ivanovna. I remember it clearly. Some porters were carrying out a sofa and they squeezed me against the wall. But painters? No, I don't remember that there were any painters, and I don't think that there was a flat open anywhere. No, there wasn't." "What do you mean?" Razumihin shouted suddenly, as though he had reflected and realised. "Why, it was on the day of the murder the painters were at work, and he was there 3 days before. What are you asking?" "Foo! I have muddled it!" Porfiry slapped himself on the forehead. "Deuce take it! This business is turning my brain," he addressed Raskolnikov somewhat apologetically. "It would be such a great thing for us to find out whether anyone had seen them between 7 and 8 at the flat. So I fancied you could perhaps have told us something. I quite muddled it." "Then you should be more careful," Razumihin observed grimly. The last words were uttered in the passage. Porfiry Petrovitch saw them to the door with excessive politeness. They went out into the street gloomy and sullen, and for some steps they did not say a word. Raskolnikov drew a deep breath. End of Chapter 5. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 3, Chapter 6 of Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 6. "I don't believe it, I can't believe it," repeated Razumihin, trying in perplexity to refute Raskolnikov's arguments. They were by now approaching Bakaleyev's lodgings, where Pulcheria Alexandrovna and Dounia had been expecting them a long while. Razumihin kept stopping on the way in the heat of discussion, confused and excited by the very fact that they were for the first time speaking openly about it. "Don't believe it then," answered Raskolnikov, with a cold, careless smile. "You were noticing nothing as usual, but I was weighing every word." "You are suspicious, that is why you weighed their words. Certainly, I agree, Porfiry's tone was rather strange, and still more that wretch Zametov. You are right, there was something about him. But why? Why?" "He has changed his mind since last night." "Quite the contrary. If they had that brainless idea, they would do their utmost to hide it and conceal their cards, so as to catch you afterwards. But it was all impudent and careless." "If they had had facts, I mean real facts, or at least grounds for suspicion, then they would certainly have tried to hide their game. In the hope of getting more, they would have made a search long ago besides. But they have no facts, not one. It is all mirage, all ambiguous, simply a floating idea. So they try to throw me out by impudence. and perhaps he was irritated at having no facts and blurted it out in his vexation. Or perhaps he has some plan; he seems an intelligent man. Perhaps he wanted to frighten me by pretending to know. They have a psychology of their own, brother. But it is loathsome explaining it all. Stop!" "And it's insulting, insulting, I understand you. But since we have spoken openly now, and it is an excellent thing that we have at last, I am glad, I will own now frankly that I noticed it in them long ago, this idea. Of course, the merest hint only, an insinuation, but why an insinuation even? How dare they? What foundation have they? If only you knew how furious I have been! Think only! Simply because a poor student, unhinged by poverty and hypochondria, on the eve of a severe delirious illness note that, suspicious, vain, proud, who has not seen a soul to speak to for 6 months, in rags and in boots without soles, has to face some wretched policemen and put up with their insolence, and the unexpected debt thrust under his nose, the IOU presented by Tchebarov, the new paint, 30° Reaumur and a stifling atmosphere, a crowd of people, the talk about the murder of a person where he had been just before, and all that on an empty stomach! He might well have a fainting fit. And that is what they found it all on. Damn them! I understand how annoying it is, but in your place, Rodya, I would laugh at them, or better still, spit in their ugly faces. And spit a dozen times in all directions. I'd hit out in all directions, neatly too, and so I'd put an end to it. Damn them! Don't be downhearted. It's a shame." "He really has put it well, though," Raskolnikov thought. "Damn them! But the cross-examination again to morrow," he said with bitterness. "Must I really enter into explanations with them? I feel vexed as it is, that I condescended to speak to Zametov yesterday in the restaurant. Damn it, I will go myself to Porfiry. I will squeeze it out of him, as one of the family. He must let me know the ins and outs of it all. And as for Zametov..." "At last he sees through him," thought Raskolnikov. "Stay!" cried Razumihin, seizing him by the shoulder again. "Stay! You were wrong. I have thought it out. You are wrong. How was that a trap? You say that the question about the workmen was a trap. But if you had done that, could you have said you had seen them painting the flat and the workmen? On the contrary, you would have seen nothing, even if you had seen it. Who would own it against himself?" "If I had done that thing, I should certainly have said that I had seen the workmen in the flat," Raskolnikov answered, with reluctance and obvious disgust. "But why speak against yourself? Because only peasants, or the most inexperienced novices, deny everything flatly at examinations. If a man is ever so little developed and experienced, he will certainly try to admit all the external facts that can't be avoided, but will seek other explanations of them, will introduce some special unexpected turn, that will give them another significance and put them in another light. Porfiry might well reckon that I should be sure to answer so, and say I had seen them to give an air of truth, and then make some explanation. But he would have told you at once that the workmen could not have been there 2 days before, and that therefore you must have been there on the day of the murder at 8 o'clock, and so he would have caught you over a detail. Yes, that is what he was reckoning on, that I should not have time to reflect, and should be in a hurry to make the most likely answer, and so would forget that the workmen could not have been there 2 days before. But how could you forget it? Nothing easier. It is in just such stupid things clever people are most easily caught. The more cunning a man is, the less he suspects that he will be caught in a simple thing. The more cunning a man is, the simpler the trap he must be caught in. Porfiry is not such a fool as you think." "He is a knave then, if that is so." Raskolnikov could not help laughing. But at the very moment he was struck by the strangeness of his own frankness, and the eagerness with which he had made this explanation, though he had kept up all the preceding conversation with gloomy repulsion, obviously with a motive from necessity. "I am getting a relish for certain aspects," he thought to himself. But almost at the same instant he became suddenly uneasy, as though an unexpected and alarming idea had occurred to him. His uneasiness kept on increasing. They had just reached the entrance to Bakaleyev's. "Go in alone," said Raskolnikov suddenly. "I will be back directly." "Where are you going?" "Why, we are just here." "I can't help it. I will come in half an hour. Tell them." "Say what you like. I will come with you." "You too want to torture me!" he screamed with such bitter irritation, such despair in his eyes that Razumihin's hands dropped. He stood for some time on the steps, looking gloomily at Raskolnikov striding rapidly away in the direction of his lodging. At last, gritting his teeth and clenching his fist, he swore he would squeeze Porfiry like a lemon that very day, and went up the stairs to reassure Pulcheria Alexandrovna, who was by now alarmed at their long absence. When Raskolnikov got home, his hair was soaked with sweat and he was breathing heavily. He went rapidly up the stairs, walked into his unlocked room and at once fastened the lock. Then in senseless terror he rushed to the corner, to that hole under the paper where he had put the things, put his hand in and for some minutes felt carefully in the hole, in every crack and fold of the paper. Finding nothing, he got up and drew a deep breath. As he was reaching the steps of Bakaleyev's, he suddenly fancied that something, a chain, a stud, or even a bit of paper in which they had been wrapped with the old woman's handwriting on it, might somehow have slipped out and been lost in some crack, and then might suddenly turn up as unexpected conclusive evidence against him. He stood as though lost in thought, and a strange, humiliated, half senseless smile strayed on his lips. He took his cap at last and went quietly out of the room. His ideas were all tangled. He went dreamily through the gateway. "Here he is himself!" shouted a loud voice. He raised his head. The porter was standing at the door of his little room and was pointing him out to a short man who looked like an artisan, wearing a long coat and a waistcoat, and looking at a distance remarkably like a woman. He stooped, and his head in a greasy cap hung forward. From his wrinkled flabby face he looked over 50, his little eyes were lost in fat, and they looked out grimly, sternly and discontentedly. "What is it?" Raskolnikov asked, going up to the porter. The man stole a look at him from under his brows, and he looked at him attentively, deliberately. Then he turned slowly and went out of the gate into the street without saying a word. "What is it?" cried Raskolnikov. "Why, he there was asking whether a student lived here, mentioned your name and whom you lodged with. I saw you coming and pointed you out, and he went away. It's funny." The porter, too, seemed rather puzzled, but not much so, and after wondering for a moment, he turned and went back to his room. Raskolnikov ran after the stranger, and at once caught sight of him walking along the other side of the street with the same even, deliberate step, with his eyes fixed on the ground, as though in meditation. He soon overtook him, but for some time walked behind him. At last, moving on to a level with him, he looked at his face. The man noticed him at once, looked at him quickly, but dropped his eyes again. And so they walked for a minute side by side without uttering a word. "You were inquiring for me of the porter," Raskolnikov said at last, but in a curiously quiet voice. The man made no answer, he didn't even look at him. Again they were both silent. "Why do you come and ask for me... and say nothing? What's the meaning of it?" Raskolnikov's voice broke, and he seemed unable to articulate the words clearly. The man raised his eyes this time and turned a gloomy, sinister look at Raskolnikov. "Murderer!" he said suddenly, in a quiet but clear and distinct voice. Raskolnikov went on walking beside him. His legs felt suddenly weak, a cold shiver ran down his spine and his heart seemed to stand still for a moment, then suddenly began throbbing as though it were set free. So they walked for about 100 paces side by side in silence. The man did not look at him. "What do you mean? What is... who is a murderer?" muttered Raskolnikov, hardly audibly. "You are a murderer," the man answered, still more articulately and emphatically, with a smile of triumphant hatred, and again he looked straight into Raskolnikov's pale face and stricken eyes. They had just reached the cross roads. The man turned to the left without looking behind him. Raskolnikov remained standing, gazing after him. He saw him turn round 50 paces away and look back at him still standing there. Raskolnikov could not see clearly, but he fancied that he was again smiling the same smile of cold hatred and triumph. With slow faltering steps, with shaking knees, Raskolnikov made his way back to his little garret, feeling chilled all over. He took off his cap and put it on the table, and for 10 minutes he stood without moving. Then he sank exhausted on the sofa, and with a weak moan of pain he stretched himself on it.
So he lay for half an hour. He thought of nothing. Some thoughts or fragments of thoughts, some images without order or coherence floated before his mind. Faces of people he had seen in his childhood or met somewhere once, whom he would never have recalled, the belfry of the church at V, the billiard table in a restaurant, and some officers playing billiards, the smell of cigars in some underground tobacco shop, a tavern room, a back staircase quite dark, all sloppy with dirty water and strewn with eggshells, and the Sunday bells floating in from somewhere. The images followed one another, whirling like a hurricane. Some of them he liked and tried to clutch at, but they faded, and all the while there was an oppression within him. But it was not overwhelming, sometimes it was even pleasant. The slight shivering still persisted, but that, too, was an almost pleasant sensation. He heard the hurried footsteps of Razumihin; he closed his eyes and pretended to be sleeping. Razumihin opened the door and stood for some time in the doorway as though hesitating, then he stepped softly into the room and went cautiously to the sofa. Raskolnikov heard Nastasya's whisper: "Don't disturb him. Let him sleep, he can have his dinner later." "Quite so," answered Razumihin. Both withdrew carefully and closed the door. Another half hour passed. Raskolnikov opened his eyes, turned on his back again, clasping his hands behind his head. "Who is he? Who is that man who sprang out of the earth? Where was he and what did he see? He has seen it all, that's clear. Where was he then? And from where did he see? Why has he only now sprung out of the earth? And how could he see? Is it possible? Hm!" continued Raskolnikov, turning cold and shivering. "And the jewel case Nikolay found behind the door, was that possible? A clue? You miss an infinitesimal line and you can build it into a pyramid of evidence. A fly flew by and saw it. Is it possible?" He felt with sudden loathing how weak, how physically weak he had become. "I ought to have known it," he thought with a bitter smile. "And how dared I, knowing myself, knowing how I should be, take up an axe and shed blood? I ought to have known beforehand. Ah, but I did know!" he whispered in despair. At times he came to a standstill at some thought. No, those men are not made so. The real master to whom all is permitted storms Toulon, makes a massacre in Paris, forgets an army in Egypt, wastes 500,000 men in the Moscow expedition and gets off with a jest at Vilna. And altars are set up to him after his death, and so all is permitted. No, such people, it seems, are not of flesh, but of bronze. One sudden irrelevant idea almost made him laugh. Napoleon, the Pyramids, Waterloo, and a wretched skinny old woman, a pawnbroker with a red trunk under her bed. It's a nice hash for Porfiry Petrovitch to digest. How can they digest it? It's too inartistic. A Napoleon creep under an old woman's bed? Ugh! How loathsome! At moments he felt he was raving. He sank into a state of feverish excitement. "The old woman is of no consequence," he thought, hotly and incoherently. "The old woman was a mistake, perhaps, but she is not what matters. The old woman was only an illness. I was in a hurry to overstep. I didn't kill a human being, but a principle. I killed the principle, but I didn't overstep. I stopped on this side. I was only capable of killing. And it seems I wasn't even capable of that. Principle? Why was that fool Razumihin abusing the socialists? They are industrious, commercial people. The happiness of all is their case. No, life is only given to me once and I shall never have it again. I don't want to wait for the happiness of all. I want to live myself, or else better, not live at all. I simply couldn't pass by my mother starving, keeping my rouble in my pocket while I waited for the happiness of all. I am putting my little brick into the happiness of all, and so my heart is at peace. Ha ha! Why have you let me slip? I only live once. I too want... Ach, I am an aesthetic louse and nothing more," he added suddenly, laughing like a madman. "Yes, I am certainly a louse," he went on, clutching at the idea, gloating over it and playing with it with vindictive pleasure. "In the first place, because I can reason that I am one, and secondly, because for a month past I have been troubling benevolent Providence, calling it to witness that not for my own fleshly lusts did I undertake it, but with a grand and noble object. Ha ha! Thirdly, because I aimed at carrying it out as justly as possible, weighing, measuring and calculating. Of all the lice I picked out the most useless one and proposed to take from her only as much as I needed for the first step, no more nor less, so the rest would have gone to a monastery according to her will, ha ha! And what shows that I am utterly a louse," he added, grinding his teeth, "is that I am perhaps viler and more loathsome than the louse I killed, and I felt beforehand that I should tell myself so after killing her. Can anything be compared with the horror of that? The vulgarity, the abjectness! I understand the prophet with his sabre on his steed, 'Allah commands and trembling creation must obey.' The prophet is right. He is right when he sets a battery across the street and blows up the innocent and the guilty without deigning to explain. It's for you to obey trembling creation and not to have desires, for that's not for you. I shall never, never forgive the old woman." His hair was soaked with sweat, his quivering lips were parched, his eyes were fixed on the ceiling. "Mother, sister, how I loved them! Why do I hate them now? Yes, I hate them. I feel a physical hatred for them. I can't bear them near me. I went up to my mother and kissed her, I remember, to embrace her and think if she only knew. Shall I tell her then? That's just what I might do. She must be the same as I am," he added, straining himself to think, as it were struggling with delirium. "Ah, how I hate the old woman now! I feel I should kill her again if she came to life. Poor Lizaveta, why did she come in? It's strange though, why is it I scarcely ever think of her as though I hadn't killed her? Lizaveta! Sonia! Poor gentle things with gentle eyes! Dear women! Why don't they weep? Why don't they moan? They give up everything, their eyes are soft and gentle. Sonia! Sonia! Gentle Sonia!" He lost consciousness. It seemed strange to him that he didn't remember how he got into the street. It was late evening, the twilight had fallen and the full moon was shining more and more brightly, but there was a peculiar breathlessness in the air. There were crowds of people in the street, workmen and business people were making their way home. Other people had come out for a walk, there was a smell of mortar, dust and stagnant water. Raskolnikov walked along, mournful and anxious. He was distinctly aware of having come out with a purpose, of having to do something in a hurry, but what it was he had forgotten. Suddenly he stood still and saw a man standing on the other side of the street beckoning to him. He crossed over to him, but at once the man turned and walked away with his head hanging, as though he had made no sign to him. "Stay, did he really beckon?" Raskolnikov wondered, but he tried to overtake him. When he was within 10 paces, he recognised him and was frightened. It was the same man, with stooping shoulders and the long coat. Raskolnikov followed him at a distance. His heart was beating. They went down a turning, the man still did not look round. "Does he know I am following him?" thought Raskolnikov. The man went into the gateway of a big house. Raskolnikov hastened to the gate and looked in to see whether he would turn round and sign to him. In the courtyard the man did turn round and again seemed to beckon him. Raskolnikov at once followed him into the yard, but the man was gone. He must have gone up the first staircase. Raskolnikov rushed after him. He heard slow, measured steps 2 flights above. The staircase seemed strangely familiar. He reached the window on the first floor; the moon shone through the panes with a melancholy and mysterious light. Then he reached the second floor. "Bah! This is the flat where the painters were at work, but how was it he did not recognise it at once?" The steps of the man above had died away. So he must have stopped or hidden somewhere. He reached the third storey. Should he go on? There was a stillness that was dreadful. But he went on. The sound of his own footsteps scared and frightened him. How dark it was! The man must be hiding in some corner here. Ah! The flat was standing wide open. He hesitated and went in. It was very dark and empty in the passage, as though everything had been removed. He crept on tiptoe into the parlour, which was flooded with moonlight. Everything there was as before, the chairs, the looking glass, the yellow sofa, and the pictures in the frames. A huge, round, copper red moon looked in at the windows. "It's the moon that makes it so still, weaving some mystery," thought Raskolnikov. He stood and waited, waited a long while, and the more silent the moonlight, the more violently his heart beat, till it was painful. And still the same hush. Suddenly he heard a momentary sharp crack, like the snapping of a splinter, and all was still again. A fly flew up suddenly and struck the window pane with a plaintive buzz. At that moment he noticed in the corner between the window and the little cupboard something like a cloak hanging on the wall. "Why is that cloak here?" he thought. "It wasn't here before." He went up to it quietly and felt that there was someone hiding behind it. He cautiously moved the cloak and saw, sitting on a chair in the corner, the old woman bent double so that he couldn't see her face. But it was she. He stood over her. "She is afraid," he thought. He stealthily took the axe from the noose and struck her one blow, then another on the skull. But strange to say, she did not stir, as though she were made of wood. He was frightened, bent down nearer and tried to look at her, but she, too, bent her head lower. He bent right down to the ground and peeped up into her face from below. He peeped and turned cold with horror. The old woman was sitting and laughing, shaking with noiseless laughter, doing her utmost that he should not hear it. Suddenly he fancied that the door from the bedroom was opened a little and that there was laughter and whispering within. He was overcome with frenzy and he began hitting the old woman on the head with all his force, but at every blow of the axe the laughter and whispering from the bedroom grew louder and the old woman was simply shaking with mirth. He was rushing away, but the passage was full of people, the doors of the flat stood open, and on the landing, on the stairs and everywhere below there were people, rows of heads, all looking but huddled together in silence and expectation. Something gripped his heart, his legs were rooted to the spot. They would not move. He tried to scream and woke up. He drew a deep breath, but his dream seemed strangely to persist. His door was flung open, and a man whom he had never seen stood in the doorway watching him intently. Raskolnikov had hardly opened his eyes and he instantly closed them again. He lay on his back without stirring. "Is it still a dream?" he wondered, and again raised his eyelids hardly perceptibly. The stranger was standing in the same place, still watching him. He stepped cautiously into the room, carefully closing the door after him, went up to the table, paused a moment, still keeping his eyes on Raskolnikov, and noiselessly seated himself on the chair by the sofa. He put his hat on the floor beside him and leaned his hands on his cane and his chin on his hands. It was evident that he was prepared to wait indefinitely. As far as Raskolnikov could make out from his stolen glances, he was a man no longer young, stout, with a full, fair, almost whitish beard. 10 minutes passed. It was still light, but beginning to get dusk. There was complete stillness in the room. Not a sound came from the stairs. Only a big fly buzzed and fluttered against the window pane. It was unbearable at last. Raskolnikov suddenly got up and sat on the sofa. "Come, tell me what you want." "I knew you were not asleep, but only pretending," the stranger answered oddly, laughing calmly. "Arkady Ivanovitch Svidrigaïlov, allow me to introduce myself." End of Part 3. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 4, Chapter 1 of Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 4, Chapter 1 "Can this be still a dream?" Raskolnikov thought once more. He looked carefully and suspiciously at the unexpected visitor. "Svidrigaïlov? What nonsense! It can't be," he said at last aloud, in bewilderment. His visitor did not seem at all surprised at this exclamation. "I've come to you for two reasons. In the first place I wanted to make your personal acquaintance, as I have already heard a great deal about you that is interesting and flattering. Secondly, I cherish the hope that you may not refuse to assist me in a matter directly concerning the welfare of your sister, Avdotya Romanovna. For without your support she might not let me come near her now, for she is prejudiced against me, but with your assistance I reckon on..." "You reckon wrongly," interrupted Raskolnikov. "They only arrived yesterday, may I ask you?" Raskolnikov made no reply. "It was yesterday, I know. I only arrived myself the day before. Well, let me tell you this, Rodion Romanovitch, I don't consider it necessary to justify myself, but kindly tell me, what was there particularly criminal on my part in all this business, speaking without prejudice, with common sense?" Raskolnikov continued to look at him in silence. "That in my own house I persecuted a defenceless girl and insulted her with my infamous proposals, is that it? I am anticipating you. But you've only to assume that I, too, am a man et nihil humanum, in a word that I am capable of being attracted and falling in love, which does not depend on our will. Then everything can be explained in the most natural manner. The question is, am I a monster or am I myself a victim? And what if I am a victim? In proposing to the object of my passion to elope with me to America or Switzerland, I may have cherished the deepest respect for her and may have thought that I was promoting our mutual happiness? Reason is the slave of passion, you know. Why, probably I was doing more harm to myself than anyone." "But that's not the point," Raskolnikov interrupted with disgust. "It's simply that whether you are right or wrong, we dislike you. We don't want to have anything to do with you. We show you the door. Go out." Svidrigaïlov broke into a sudden laugh. "But you're... but there's no getting round you," he said, laughing in the frankest way. "I hoped to get round you, but you took up the right line at once. But you're trying to get round me still." "What of it? What of it?" cried Svidrigaïlov, laughing openly. "But this is what the French call bonne guerre and the most innocent form of deception. But still you have interrupted me. One way or another, I repeat again, there would never have been any unpleasantness except for what happened in the garden. Marfa Petrovna..." "You've got rid of Marfa Petrovna too, they say?" Raskolnikov interrupted rudely. "Oh, you've heard that too, then? You'd be sure to, though. But as for your question, I really don't know what to say, though my own conscience is quite at rest on that score. Don't suppose that I am in any apprehension about it. All was regular and in order, the medical inquiry diagnosed apoplexy, due to bathing immediately after a heavy dinner and a bottle of wine, and indeed it could have proved nothing else. But I'll tell you what I've been thinking to myself of late, on my way here in the train, especially. Didn't I contribute to all that? Calamity, morally, in a way, by irritation or something of the sort. But I came to the conclusion that that, too, was quite out of the question." Raskolnikov laughed. "I wonder you trouble yourself about it." "But what are you laughing at? Only consider, I struck her just twice with a switch, there were no marks even. Don't regard me as a cynic, please. I am perfectly aware how atrocious it was of me and all that. But I know for certain, too, that Marfa Petrovna was very likely pleased at my, so to say, warmth. The story of your sister had been wrung out to the last drop. For the last 3 days Marfa Petrovna had been forced to sit at home; she had nothing to show herself with in the town. Besides, she had bored them so with that letter you heard about her reading the letter and all of a sudden those 2 switches fell from heaven. Her first act was to order the carriage to be got out, not to speak of the fact that there are cases when women are very, very glad to be insulted in spite of all their show of indignation. There are instances of it with everyone. Human beings in general, indeed, greatly love to be insulted, have you noticed that? But it's particularly so with women. One might even say it's their only amusement." At one time Raskolnikov thought of getting up and walking out and so finishing the interview. But some curiosity and even a sort of prudence made him linger for a moment. "You are fond of fighting?" he asked carelessly. "No, not very," Svidrigaïlov answered calmly. "And Marfa Petrovna and I scarcely ever fought. We lived very harmoniously, and she was always pleased with me. I only used the whip twice in all our 7 years, not counting a third occasion of a very ambiguous nature. The first time, 2 months after our marriage, immediately after we arrived in the country, and the last time was that of which we are speaking. Did you suppose I was such a monster? Such a reactionary, such a slave driver? Ha ha! By the way, do you remember, Rodion Romanovitch, how a few years ago in those days of beneficent publicity, a nobleman, I've forgotten his name, was put to shame everywhere, in all the papers, for having thrashed a German woman in the railway train? You remember? It was in those days, that very year, I believe, the disgraceful action of the age took place. You know, the Egyptian Nights, that public reading, you remember, the dark eyes, you know. Ah, the golden days of our youth, where are they? Well, As for the gentleman who thrashed the German, I feel no sympathy with him, because after all what need is there for sympathy? But I must say that there are sometimes such provoking Germans that I don't believe there is a progressive who could quite answer for himself. No one looked at the subject from that point of view then, but that's the truly humane point of view, I assure you." After saying this, Svidrigaïlov broke into a sudden laugh again. Raskolnikov saw clearly that this was a man with a firm purpose in his mind and able to keep it to himself. "I expect you've not talked to anyone for some days?" he asked. "Scarcely anyone. I suppose you are wondering at my being such an adaptable man." "No, I am only wondering at your being too adaptable a man." "Because I am not offended at the rudeness of your questions? Is that it? But why take offence? As you asked, so I answered," he replied, with a surprising expression of simplicity. "You know, there's hardly anything I take interest in," he went on, as it were dreamily, "especially now. I've nothing to do. You are quite at liberty to imagine, though, that I am making up to you with a motive, particularly as I told you I want to see your sister about something. But I'll confess frankly, I am very much bored. The last 3 days especially, so I am delighted to see you. Don't be angry, Rodion Romanovitch, but you seem to be somehow awfully strange yourself. Say what you like, there's something wrong with you, and now too, not this very minute, I mean, but now, generally. Well, well, I won't, don't scowl. I am not such a bear, you know, as you think." Raskolnikov looked gloomily at him. "You are not a bear perhaps at all," he said. "I fancy indeed that you are a man of very good breeding, or at least know how on occasion to behave like one." "I am not particularly interested in anyone's opinion," Svidrigaïlov answered dryly and even with a shade of haughtiness, "and therefore why not be vulgar at times when vulgarity is such a convenient cloak for our climate? And especially if one has a natural propensity that way," he added, laughing again. "But I've heard you have many friends here. You are, as they say, not without connections. What can you want with me, then, unless you've some special object?" "Well, that's true that I have friends here," Svidrigaïlov admitted, not replying to the chief point. "I've met some already. I've been lounging about for the last 3 days and I've seen them, or they've seen me. That's a matter of course. I am well dressed and reckoned not a poor man. The emancipation of the serfs hasn't affected me. My property consists chiefly of forests and water meadows. The revenue has not fallen off. But I'm not going to see them. I was sick of them long ago. I've been here 3 days and have called on no one. What a town it is! How has it come into existence among us? Tell me that. A town of officials and students of all sorts. Yes, there's a great deal I didn't notice when I was here 8 years ago, kicking up my heels. My only hope now is in anatomy, by Jove, it is." "Anatomy?" "But as for these clubs, Dussots, parades, or progress, indeed maybe... well, all that can go on without me," he went on, again without noticing the question. "Besides, who wants to be a card sharper?" "Why, have you been a card sharper then?" "How could I help being? There was a regular set of us, men of the best society 8 years ago. We had a fine time. And all men of breeding, you know, poets, men of property. And indeed, as a rule in our Russian society, the best manners are found among those who've been thrashed. Have you noticed that? I've deteriorated in the country, but I did get into prison for debt, through a low Greek who came from Nezhin. Then Marfa Petrovna turned up, she bargained with him and bought me off for 30,000 silver pieces (I owed 70,000). We were united in lawful wedlock and she bore me off into the country like a treasure. You know she was 5 years older than I. She was very fond of me. For 7 years I never left the country. And, take note, that all my life she held a document over me, the IOU for 30,000 roubles, so if I were to elect to be restive about anything, I should be trapped at once, and she would have done it. Women find nothing incompatible in that." "If it hadn't been for that, would you have given her the slip?" "I don't know what to say. It was scarcely the document restrained me. I didn't want to go anywhere else. Marfa Petrovna herself invited me to go abroad, seeing I was bored, but I've been abroad before and always felt sick there. For no reason, but the sunrise, the Bay of Naples, the sea, you look at them and it makes you sad. What's most revolting is that one is really sad. No, it's better at home. Here at least one blames others for everything and excuses oneself. I should have gone perhaps on an expedition to the North Pole. Because j'ai le vin mauvais and hate drinking, there's nothing left but wine. I've tried it. But, I say, I've been told Berg is going up in a great balloon next Sunday from the Yusupov garden and will take up passengers at a fee. Is it true? Why? Would you go up? I? No, oh no," muttered Svidrigaïlov, really seeming to be deep in thought. "What does he mean? Is he in earnest?" Raskolnikov wondered. "No, the document didn't restrain me," Svidrigaïlov went on meditatively. "It was my own doing, not leaving the country, and nearly a year ago Marfa Petrovna gave me back the document on my name day and made me a present of a considerable sum of money too. She had a fortune, you know. 'You see how I trust you, Arkady Ivanovitch,' that was actually her expression. You don't believe she used it? But do you know, I manage the estate quite decently. They know me in the neighbourhood. I ordered books too. Marfa Petrovna at first approved, but afterwards she was afraid of my overstudying." "You seem to be missing Marfa Petrovna very much." "Missing her? Perhaps. Really, perhaps I am. And, by the way, do you believe in ghosts?" "What ghosts?" "Why, ordinary ghosts." "Do you believe in them?" "Perhaps not. Pour vous plaire, I wouldn't say no exactly." "Do you see them then?" Svidrigaïlov looked at him rather oddly. "Marfa Petrovna is pleased to visit me," he said, twisting his mouth into a strange smile. "How do you mean she is pleased to visit you?" "She has been 3 times. I saw her first on the very day of the funeral, an hour after she was buried. It was the day before I left to come here. The second time was the day before yesterday at daybreak, on the journey at the station of Malaya Vishera, and the third time was 2 hours ago in the room where I am staying. I was alone." "Were you awake?" "Oh, quite awake. I was wide awake every time. She comes, speaks to me for a minute and goes out at the door, always at the door. I can almost hear her." "What made me think that something of the sort must be happening to you?" Raskolnikov said suddenly. At the same moment he was surprised at having said it. He was much excited. "What? Did you think so?" Svidrigaïlov asked in astonishment. "Did you really? Didn't I say that there was something in common between us, eh?" "You never said so!" Raskolnikov cried sharply and with heat. "Didn't I?" "No." "I thought I did. When I came in and saw you lying with your eyes shut, pretending, I said to myself at once, 'Here's the man.'" "What do you mean by 'the man'? What are you talking about?" cried Raskolnikov. "What do I mean? I really don't know," Svidrigaïlov muttered ingenuously, as though he, too, were puzzled. For a minute they were silent. They stared in each other's faces. "That's all nonsense!" Raskolnikov shouted with vexation. "What does she say when she comes to you?" "She? Would you believe it, she talks of the silliest trifles and man is a strange creature it makes me angry. The first time she came in I was tired, you know, the funeral service, the funeral ceremony, the lunch afterwards, at last I was left alone in my study. I lighted a cigar and began to think. She came in at the door. 'You've been so busy to day, Arkady Ivanovitch, you have forgotten to wind the dining room clock,' she said. All those 7 years I've wound that clock every week, and if I forgot it she would always remind me. The next day I set off on my way here. I got out at the station at daybreak. I'd been asleep, tired out, with my eyes half open, I was drinking some coffee. I looked up and there was suddenly Marfa Petrovna sitting beside me with a pack of cards in her hands. 'Shall I tell your fortune for the journey, Arkady Ivanovitch?' She was a great hand at telling fortunes. I shall never forgive myself for not asking her to. I ran away in a fright, and besides the bell rang. I was sitting to day feeling very heavy after a miserable dinner from a cookshop. I was sitting smoking, all of a sudden Marfa Petrovna again. She came in very smart in a new green silk dress with a long train. 'Good day, Arkady Ivanovitch. How do you like my dress? Aniska can't make like this.' Aniska was a dressmaker in the country, one of our former serf girls who had been trained in Moscow, a pretty wench. She stood turning round before me. I looked at the dress and then I looked carefully, very carefully at her face. 'I wonder you trouble to come to me about such trifles, Marfa Petrovna.' 'Good gracious, you won't let one disturb you about anything.' To tease her I said, 'I want to get married, Marfa Petrovna.' 'Oh, that's just like you, Arkady Ivanovitch. It does you very little credit to come looking for a bride when you've hardly buried your wife. And if you could make a good choice at least... But I know it won't be for your happiness or hers, you will only be a laughing-stock to all good people. Then she went out and her train seemed to rustle. Isn't it nonsense, eh?" "But perhaps you are telling lies," Raskolnikov put in. "I rarely lie," answered Svidrigaïlov thoughtfully, apparently not noticing the rudeness of the question. "And in the past, have you ever seen ghosts before?" "Yes, I have seen them, but only once in my life, 6 years ago. I had a serf, Filka. Just after his burial, I called out forgetting, 'Filka, my pipe!' He came in and went to the cupboard where my pipes were. I sat still and thought, 'He is doing it out of revenge,' because we had a violent quarrel just before his death. 'How dare you come in with a hole in your elbow?' I said. 'Go away, you scamp!' He turned and went out and never came again. I didn't tell Marfa Petrovna at the time, I wanted to have a service sung for him, but I was ashamed." "You should go to a doctor." "I know I am not well, without your telling me, though I don't know what's wrong. I believe I am 5 times as strong as you are. I didn't ask you whether you believe that ghosts are seen, but whether you believe that they exist." "No, I won't believe it!" Raskolnikov cried with positive anger. "What do people generally say?" muttered Svidrigaïlov, as though speaking to himself, looking aside and bowing his head. "They say, 'You are ill, so what appears to you is only unreal fantasy.' But that's not strictly logical. I agree that ghosts only appear to the sick, but that only proves that they are unable to appear except to the sick, not that they don't exist." "Nothing of the sort," Raskolnikov insisted irritably. "No? You don't think so?" Svidrigaïlov went on, looking at him deliberately. "But what do you say to this argument? Help me with it. Ghosts are, as it were, shreds and fragments of other worlds, the beginning of them. A man in health has, of course, no reason to see them, because he is above all a man of this earth and is bound for the sake of completeness and order to live only in this life. But as soon as one is ill, as soon as the normal earthly order of the organism is broken, one begins to realise the possibility of another world, and the more seriously ill one is, the closer becomes one's contact with that other world, so that as soon as the man dies he steps straight into that world. I thought of that long ago. If you believe in a future life, you could believe in that too." "I don't believe in a future life," said Raskolnikov. Svidrigaïlov sat lost in thought. "And what if there are only spiders there, or something of that sort?" he said suddenly. "He is a madman," thought Raskolnikov. "We always imagine eternity as something beyond our conception, something vast, vast. But why must it be vast? Instead of all that, what if it's one little room like a bath‐house in the country, black and grimy and spiders in every corner, and that's all eternity is? I sometimes fancy it like that." "Can it be you can imagine nothing juster and more comforting than that?" Raskolnikov cried with a feeling of anguish. "Juster? And how can we tell, perhaps that is just. And do you know, it's what I would certainly have made it," answered Svidrigaïlov with a vague smile. This horrible answer sent a cold chill through Raskolnikov. Svidrigaïlov raised his head, looked at him and suddenly began laughing. "Only think," he cried, "half an hour ago we had never seen each other, we regarded each other as enemies, there is a matter unsettled between us, we've thrown it aside and now we've gone into the abstract. Wasn't I right in saying that we were birds of a feather?" "Kindly allow me," Raskolnikov went on irritably, "to ask you to explain why you have honoured me with your visit and I am in a hurry, I have no time to waste, I want to go out." "By all means, by all means. Your sister, Avdotya Romanovna, is going to be married to Mr. Luzhin, Pyotr Petrovitch." "Can you refrain from any question about my sister and from mentioning her name? I can't understand how you dare utter her name in my presence, if you really are Svidrigaïlov." "Why, but I've come here to speak about her. How can I avoid mentioning her?" "Very good, speak, but make haste." "I am sure that you must have formed your own opinion of this Mr. Luzhin, who is a connection of mine through my wife, if you have only seen him for half an hour or heard any facts about him. He is no match for Avdotya Romanovna. I believe Avdotya Romanovna is sacrificing herself generously and imprudently for the sake of her family. I fancied from all I had heard of you that you would be very glad if the match could be broken off without the sacrifice of worldly advantages. Now I know you personally, I am convinced of it." "All this is very naïve. "Excuse me, I should have said impudent on your part," said Raskolnikov. "You mean to say that I am seeking my own ends. Don't be uneasy, Rodion Romanovitch. If I were working for my own advantage, I would not have spoken out so directly. I am not quite a fool. I will confess something psychologically curious about that. Just now, defending my love for Avdotya Romanovna, I said I was myself the victim. Well, let me tell you that I've no feeling of love now, not the slightest, so that I wonder myself indeed, for I really did feel something." "Through idleness and depravity," Raskolnikov put in. "I certainly am idle and depraved, but your sister has such qualities that even I could not help being impressed by them, but that's all nonsense, as I see myself now." "Have you seen that long?" "I began to be aware of it before, but was only perfectly sure of it the day before yesterday, almost at the moment I arrived in Petersburg. I still fancied in Moscow, though, that I was coming to try to get Avdotya Romanovna's hand and to cut out Mr. Luzhin." "Excuse me for interrupting you. Kindly be brief and come to the object of your visit. I am in a hurry, I want to go out." "With the greatest pleasure. On arriving here and determining on a certain journey, I should like to make some necessary preliminary arrangements. I left my children with an aunt; they are well provided for and they have no need of me personally. And a nice father I should make, too. I have taken nothing but what Marfa Petrovna gave me a year ago; that's enough for me. Excuse me, I am just coming to the point. Before the journey, which may come off, I want to settle Mr. Luzhin too. It's not that I detest him so much, but it was through him I quarrelled with Marfa Petrovna when I learned that she had dished up this marriage. I want now to see Avdotya Romanovna through your mediation, and if you like, in your presence, to explain to her that in the first place she will never gain anything but harm from Mr. Luzhin, then, begging her pardon for all past unpleasantness, to make her a present of 10,000 roubles and so assist the rupture with Mr. Luzhin, a rupture to which I believe she is herself not disinclined if she could see a way to it." "You are certainly mad!" cried Raskolnikov, not so much angered as astonished. "How dare you talk like that?" "I knew you would scream at me. But in the first place, though I am not rich, this 10,000 roubles is perfectly free. I have absolutely no need for it. If Avdotya Romanovna does not accept it, I shall waste it in some more foolish way. That's the first thing. Secondly, my conscience is perfectly easy. I make the offer with no ulterior motive. You may not believe it, but in the end Avdotya Romanovna and you will know. The point is that I did actually cause your sister, whom I greatly respect, some trouble and unpleasantness, and so, sincerely regretting it, I want, not to compensate, not to repay her for the unpleasantness, but simply to do something to her advantage, to show that I am not, after all, privileged to do nothing but harm. If there were a millionth fraction of self‐interest in my offer, I should not have made it so openly. And I should not have offered her 10,000 only, when 5 weeks ago I offered her more. Besides, I may perhaps very soon marry a young lady, and that alone ought to prevent suspicion of any design on Avdotya Romanovna. In conclusion, let me say that in marrying Mr. Luzhin, she's taking money just the same, only from another man. Don't be angry, Rodion Romanovitch, think it over coolly and quietly." Svidrigaïlov himself was exceedingly cool and quiet as he was saying this. "I beg you to say no more," said Raskolnikov. "In any case this is unpardonable impertinence." "Not in the least. Then a man may do nothing but harm to his neighbour in this world, and is prevented from doing the tiniest bit of good by trivial conventional formalities. That's absurd. If I died, for instance, and left that sum to your sister in my will, surely she wouldn't refuse it?" "Very likely she would." "Oh, no, indeed! However, if you refuse it, so be it, though 10,000 roubles is a capital thing to have on occasion. In any case, I beg you to repeat what I have said to Avdotya Romanovna." "No, I won't." "In that case, Rodion Romanovitch, I shall be obliged to try and see her myself and worry her by doing so." "And if I do tell her, will you not try to see her?" "I don't know really what to say. I should like very much to see her once more." "Don't hope for it." "I'm sorry, but you don't know me. Perhaps we may become better friends." "You think we may become friends?" "And why not?" Svidrigaïlov said, smiling. He stood up and took his hat. "I didn't quite intend to disturb you, and I came here without reckoning on it. though I was very much struck by your face this morning." "Where did you see me this morning?" Raskolnikov asked uneasily. "I saw you by chance. I kept fancying there is something about you like me. But don't be uneasy, I am not intrusive. I used to get on all right with card sharpers, and I never bored Prince Svirbey, a great personage who was a distant relation of mine. And I could write about Raphael's Madonna in Madame Prilukov's album, and I never left Marfa Petrovna's side for 7 years, and I used to stay the night at Viazemsky's house in the Haymarket in the old days, and I may go up in a balloon with Berg, perhaps." "Oh, all right. Are you starting soon on your travels, may I ask?" "What travels?" "Why, on that journey you spoke of it yourself." "A journey?" "Oh, yes, I did speak of a journey. Well, that's a wide subject. If only you knew what you were asking," he added and gave a sudden loud, short laugh. "Perhaps I'll get married instead of the journey. They're making a match for me." "Here?" "Yes." "How have you had time for that?" "But I am very anxious to see Avdotya Romanovna once. I earnestly beg it. Well, good bye for the present. Oh, yes, I have forgotten something. Tell your sister, Rodion Romanovitch, that Marfa Petrovna remembered her in her will and left her 3,000 roubles. That's absolutely certain. Marfa Petrovna arranged it a week before her death, and it was done in my presence. Avdotya Romanovna will be able to receive the money in 2 or 3 weeks." "Are you telling the truth?" "Yes, tell her. Well, your servant, I am staying very near you." As he went out, Svidrigaïlov ran up against Razumihin in the doorway. End of Part 4, Chapter 1. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.